This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is October 16th, 2025.
I'm Scott Lennebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, doctors are quitting, the strikes are rolling on, parties continue to prep for the budget that's still like 2.5 weeks away, and some Canadians want to put nukes on the moon. That last one's not as political, but it's a funny story that we want to talk about. So support the show at patreon.com/politicos. There's lots of other things going on, but it was Thanksgiving week here in Canada, so things were a little bit quieter with the legislature not sitting. But let's start in Kamloops, where 7 OBGYNs, the entire maternal care department of the hospital, has resigned, saying it's an unsafe amount of work. They don't have the support. They're just fed up with Interior Health, and in 90 days, they will be off the job because it's a 90-day notice, so people aren't like out of care tomorrow, but it's not good.
No, it's very bad. It's, it's yet another moment in the slow motion collapse of the BC healthcare system.
Yeah, I think there are signs of optimism in some areas. I think the family doctor crisis is abating and people are finding family doctors. I'm hearing more anecdotal stories. I'd be really curious to see stronger data on this, or on that part at least. But even at the same time, there are so many aspects of the healthcare system that, you can incentivize people to go to family doctor and general practice, and that's great. But then suddenly specialty medicine struggles, and it's this balancing system that I don't envy the health ministers for having to deal with, but it is so critical because if you don't have a health system, people die. Just straight up. That's how it works. So not great. This comes after, I think we talked about a story a few weeks or a couple months ago of the Kelowna hospital struggling to keep its prenatal clinics open, or postnatal. I forget. It was in trouble in a similar realm. And here we go. Now there's going to be some challenges. Interior Health is saying they have 12 candidates they've identified in the past few months. They're hoping to expedite hiring 8 or 9 to stabilize service. They're bringing in locums and OBGYNs from elsewhere with a $7,100 per day, please save our hospital, as well as overnight premiums.
It's a pretty good gauge if you can get that pay right there. What stands out to me on that one is over the past few months, we've identified 12 potential people. You need the people. Just hire them. Don't take several months to find and select candidates. Once you have someone, give them an offer letter, because even an unperfect fit is better than having nobody in the department to look after, anybody coming in for OBGYN healthcare services.
Yeah, I have no insights into the hiring process of doctors. I do imagine it can be a little bit slower than when I need to hire an intern to work for me straight out of college or who's still a student. Doctors possibly already have existing jobs and they need to wind down their practice before up and relocating to Kamloops. But this is a crisis situation, to put it mildly. When your hospital loses all its doctors in a department, you need to jump into gear. And it's frustrating that this is the kind of situation that I think it's probably going to take to get Interior Health to work harder at this. I know there have been shakeups at Interior Health recently, so that it's bad. That's all I can keep coming back to.
Yeah, it's bad. It's the only other thing I can keep coming back to is that it's a wonder the provincial government doesn't wear this a little more than they do, because we're on year 3 or 4 of rolling ER closures. there's that story we talked about a couple months ago from another hospital where one of their departments was basically shutting down because they basically had no staff. Like, you gotta wonder at what point this actually like rebounds back on the NDP, because this sort of thing is the sort of thing that really ought to bring down governments, and it doesn't seem to be having much of an effect. The polls have been ridiculously stable despite everything going on, and like the absolute mess that is like several very key components of the provincial government's services.
Yeah.
Like they're like, I know the Conservatives aren't exactly doing well, and they had another off couple weeks. We don't have it on the show notes, but like right now, the word is that a bunch of the staffers, and particularly I think in the communication side, are like shopping around resumes and are just talking like mass resignations in the Conservative rank. Look, they're not doing well by any means, but traditionally in Canada, governments defeat themselves rather than the opposition being just so amazing. And I don't know, if you'd asked me at pretty much any other point ever, I would have said this is the sort of thing that's very well inside of the governments defeat themselves category. This level of mismanagement.
Yeah, what the government is trying to pitch was an announcement this week that they have opened enrollment for Simon Fraser University's new medical school, the first new medical school in Western Canada in 60 years. The first class will be 48 students and will start soon. And, it'll take them obviously a few years. The first 48 students will expect to hear whether they are accepted in May or June 2026. And then probably start in September 2026, with the school growing to be 120 students by 2035. And I think that's an absolutely critical step to solving the crisis long term. In the short term, they are talking up the campaign they've done through the US to try to solicit health workers north. They're claiming, we got 1,400 applications, 140 people have already accepted positions. And the health ministry says 29 of those are doctors. The rest are nurses or other healthcare workers. So,
29 is great, but like it's hardly a solve the crisis level number.
Yeah, it kind of speaks to the depth of the challenge here. Like the premier saying good progress is a 25% reduction in ER closures.
Is it though? Like that should not be acceptable. The correct number of ER closures is 0. Any other number of ER closures is just a complete failure that, outside of like truly unforeseen circumstances, which at this point, we're several years in, there should be no unforeseen circumstances on this one. That's the sort of thing where people ought to get fired or resign over.
So, good work on the SFU medical school, which will be working next year. Bad work in Kamloops, and hopefully people come along and pick this up. I guess we can roll into the next story. The other thing not working for the government is the government, as the BCGEU strike continues to roll on. I think they're in about week 7. Joining them now is the Professional Employees Association. So basically, your frontline government workers, whether it's at corrections, BC, like the provincial jails, as in the courtrooms, as clerks, at the liquor stores, are off the job, other than like the essentials, the wardens in the jails.
I imagine the correctional people can't exactly go on strike because you can't exactly leave the jails and prisons unguarded.
Put the prisoners in charge, Scott.
Yeah, that never works well.
There will be non-critical employees in BC Corrections for sure, though. And with the PEA, you have all of the licensed professionals, the doctors, lawyers, engineers that work for the government, also on strike, which, when the engineers are on strike, things are going bad. We both have engineering degrees.
Yeah, I would have been a little curious of what like the breakdown by professions on that vote was. Would not surprise me if the engineers were at the bottom of that one.
Yeah, I don't dig in to see how those strike votes came out, but I've very rarely seen a strike vote that's narrow. Like when the union feels like it needs to go to its members for strike votes, it's 80% or higher. It's usually a pretty strong endorsement to take some job action. It's an interesting, you asked me before we started, what impact am I seeing in my day-to-day life? And I can point to picket lines at BC Liquor, but we have private liquor stores you can still get. Apparently, the expensive wines, the cheaper wines are running out. I think things are starting to roll around in the background. A lot of small restaurants are struggling because their liquor supplies have to come from the Liquor Distribution Board, which is made up of BCGEU workers.
Yeah, and like any monopoly, like when things go wrong on it, it has spillover effects and doesn't usually work out quite so well. Like, it's just kind of ridiculous that a restaurant, if they can't go to their regular supplier, just can't find an alternate supplier and get their liquor that way. Like, really, the whole system like should be seriously reformed, and monopolies are just bad. Shouldn't have them, whether or not they're run by the government or other people.
I guess what we'll keep watching for is who breaks first. The unions are saying the government is offering 3.5% over 2 years, or 2% and 2%, and the unions want to see double that essentially in pay increases to keep up with inflation that has been higher in the last couple of years, and the unions have not taken they haven't really had decent wage hikes in quite a while. So it's tough on that front. So I don't know. If I go into BC Reddit subs on any of these stories, there's a lot of workers quick to yell and get mad at, even on like David Eby, I think, posted a Ask Me Anything on Reddit a week or two ago, and the union workers, whether in like coordinated or not, I don't know, but they were all in there going, when are you going to solve the strike? When are you going to solve the strike? When are you going to pay workers a decent wage? So they're trying different angles to put pressure on the government, but I think the government is still trying to play its austerity card, or, we're in a tight fiscal situation and suck it up.
Yeah, because that is the thing. Like the government has pretty significantly increased spending over the time in office, and you start adding all of these increased labor costs up, and it pretty much has a real chance of kind of crowding out any other spending initiatives they're going to want to do over the coming years, which, there's some economic headwinds and some need to do some changes on that front. Having the scarce fiscal resources be eaten up is something I could see the government not wanting to give away that flexibility right now. But also, it doesn't seem like they're facing a huge amount of pressure. I mean, Reddit comments aside, like, there doesn't seem to be like a huge groundswell among the general public of just frustration and wanting to get things back to normal and have the strike end. Like, there are, individual things. We mentioned the restaurant thing. I'm sure some people are annoyed on some of the other stuff they have to deal with the government on, but you don't hear it really breaking out into like general discontent with the government, as far as I can tell.
I think it's one of those things that's going to chip away at them, right? Like you say, healthcare is an issue that should be pulling down at them. And like for the NDP, fighting with workers is going to wear at their base, right? It's going to wear at their ability to fundraise, ability to get volunteers out. And they're not facing the electorate in the next year or two if they don't want to. So maybe they're happy to fight this fight. But at some point, David Eby, like, in a month, David Eby faces his membership, who will vote at the convention on whether he should stay or go. And maybe that's where he starts to lose ground. Maybe he does poorly in next month's leadership convention, not just because of the BCGEU strike, but just a general, like, what are you doing? The kind of question we've asked on this podcast. Like, you're blessed with utter incompetence on the opposition side, and yet, what are you doing?
That's a very good question. I'm not even sure if the government could answer that one. It's very much like being in office a long time, government-itis, where, I'm sure if any of them would be asked, they could list off like half a dozen, initiatives that are in various stages, but there's no like overarching idea of what they want to do. And, doing some, tiny tweak here and there, like citizen services or whatever, just isn't like a broad general direction and momentum that moves the entire government agenda on it. It has it's a government of like 400 different initiatives, but no overall plan and vision.
You don't consider the Statutes Act and the Regulations Act an overall vision?
No, I mean, like, perfect example. Like, it's good that you can now just actually rely on what the government puts online for the official text of regulations and stuff, but yeah, that's not solving the housing or healthcare crisis. And even on both of those, the big thing that we heard this week on healthcare was a school they announced several years ago and started working on it is now at the point where they can start accepting applications.
It does feel like the kind of announcement they brought out when they realized this Kamloops story was going to hit the press. And I don't know that they knew that, but it was like, oh no, we're doing something. Look, we have this.
I don't know. They really need to figure out, like, in 1 or 2 sentences, not 1 to 200 pages, what they want to do. And I don't actually know if anybody in the Premier's office is actually able to answer that right now.
Well, we're on the subject of strikes. Let's jump to the federal government, where the postal strike is slowing down a little bit as Canada Post is just Canada Postal workers, I should say, have decided to resume some mail delivery. They've kind of rolled back to a rolling strike from their ramp up after the government announced the recommended changes to Canada Post to cut service standards in a number of ways. The union hasn't given an official reason why they don't want to keep maximum pressure up, but it's not a sign of strength to go from full strike to half strike.
Yeah, it's a pretty big sign of weakness, and there's been some reporting in the Star and elsewhere that there's discontent among the ranks on this one, and just look from the outside and a little bit on what some of those stories are saying. It sure seems like the Postal Workers Union kind of hastily reacted to a government announcement. Like, I'm pretty sure it was literally that evening after the government didn't announce they were doing these changes, just opened the door to let Canada Post consider them.
I think there was a strong emphasis or suggestion to Canada Post to take them up. But when you're technically
when you're running a $10 million a day deficit, anything that's let's stop the sinking ship from taking on more water is going to be something that anyone would strongly look at doing. But getting back to the original point on that, it sure seems like the union reacted hastily without actually thinking this through at all. And maybe they don't have much of a strike fund left. I mean, they were just on strike within the past year. There's chances that there's some dissatisfaction in the ranks. could also be that turns out not a lot of people really care all that much because, unlike the 80s or whatever, most people aren't getting their critical correspondence delivered by a person on ink on dead trees, and that there's different ways of communicating. If there was a carrier pigeons guild, I don't think anyone would notice if that thing went on strike, and Canada Post is shifting more into that category than an essential service for a huge chunk of Canadians, and that also means the leverage and power of going on strike is not as impactful as it once would have been.
I mean, I don't have any insight into what's happening in this union. The vibe I get from the outside is sort of similar to that, right? They have no strike fund. I think they did make the call. They had to go hard when that announcement came to try to maximum pressure back, but they probably got the wind pretty quick that the government didn't give a fuck and wasn't about to back down, in which case they went, well, we can't afford a protracted full strike because our members will starve. So let's let them pick up a few shifts, get some mail moving around, and keep trying to half pressure this rather than collapse entirely. So they save the strike by starving it down a bit.
The thing about
which ironically is what Canada Post wants to do to its services.
the thing about going real hard right at the bat and playing all your cards is if it doesn't actually end up impacting anything, you've just shown that you don't have a strong hand, and I think that's where the union ended up here. And I mean, you can take issue with Canada Post wanting to change things up, but it really is in a bad spot. It is hemorrhaging money, and a postal model that made sense when people sent 3 times or more the amount of letter mail. You can't just carry that on forever, and someone will probably respond with something about it, being a service and not necessarily having to turn a profit. But you also have, if you're the government, you also have to ask if it makes sense to sink billions of dollars into maintaining a old model versus figuring out a more sustainable new model. And it's tough times fiscally, and it's real hard to make the case on anything but kind of nostalgia that not changing up the model is worth a lot of money.
I mean, we litigated all this a couple of weeks ago. I mean, for me, the biggest problem I see with the government's proposals is they didn't put forward anything to generate revenue. There is still money to be made in moving things around because people move and order shit all over the place, right? Purolator, which is owned mostly by Canada Post, is profitable. Most of the shipping companies are profitable. What makes Canada Post lose money is its requirement to service every house in this country or every mailing address. And that is part of being a service. So if you could fold some of the Purolator services in or somehow better improve the package handling at Canada Post, you could stem that bleed a lot more.
Well, that is part of the thing too. Which Canada Post went from, I believe it was the majority of the package market in Canada to trailing that significantly. They lost a lot of market share over just a couple of years.
Everyone will agree it's been poorly managed. The union will back you up on that, Scott. So, but there seems to have no interest in shaking up management. I guess the government will just kind of let this continue on. I'm curious if they do try any of the labor tricks that we saw under the Trudeau government, pulling out the deep sections of the labor code that let them just force federally regulated workers to the bargaining table without back to work legislation. Carney doesn't seem as eager to do that. He's fine to just let this kind of roll on, but maybe
they do that
he'll
with
change.
The airlines?
Oh, was it in?
That was under Carney.
All right. Maybe he will play it out. I guess they took a little while on getting Canada Post back last year. It was kind of halfway through the Christmas rush where they went, all right, enough's enough. So maybe because we're not into that year end, a lot of mail gets sent. Things won't get pushed as quick, but at some point this will come to an end, just like the GEU strike here in BC. In the meantime, Carney is still prepping for his budget that comes in 2.5 weeks, and all we have to talk about is like how everyone's lining up for that. On the opposition side, the Bloc Québécois came out with a platform, like they released
color PDF kind of thing.
Yeah, they released a large document with, I think, what was it?
18, I think it was.
18 total demands, 6 that are like red lines, 8-page document, pictures everywhere. It's a platform, right?
Just interesting. I can't remember a opposition party ever doing that as like a pre-budget. This is what we want to see thing.
Yeah. I assume you hate this because it's a lot of spending they're demanding, increasing OAS, for example.
Yeah, because we like already the elderly are by far the biggest beneficiaries of federal spending. Like generationally, there's a huge gap in that. And also the senior citizens are economically the best off generation in Canada. They have pretty decent incomes despite being retired. They've seen huge gains in terms of their assets over the years. Like, really, if you're looking for where the next dollar of federal spending should go, it should not be for seniors. It should be going towards stuff like housing, helping the unemployment rate among young Canadians and stuff. Like, just it's really like doubling down on the wrong area to be focusing on that.
Well, that's not the only thing. They do want some money to go to housing. They want a renewed rapid housing construction initiative where Quebec just gets a transfer. Quebec would also get transfers for the carbon tax, just an $814 million check for them, as well as an increase to the Canada Health transfer by $11.6 billion over 5 years. They also, on the housing front, though, a little bit more interestingly, want first-time buyers to get an interest-free loan to help with an initial down payment. And then there's a few other things further down in their list, like subsidies for agriculture and some other social spending. It's not all just spending. They do want some of the subsidies to the oil and gas industry cut to put some money back on the budget side. So it's not all just money to Quebec.
Right. It's also taking money from other provinces.
Well, from their businesses. But it's I'm less interested in the substance of it than the like politics and the strategy. Because like you said, I don't think I've ever seen something like this come from the opposition of like, hey, here's the platform you need to do. Like, we still have the NDP saying, we need to see investments in housing and this and that and affordability without like
being specific at all.
Yeah.
Having any concrete asks, really.
Yeah.
Well, except maybe lining their own party pockets on the give more money to the party apparatus for parliamentary staff.
Officially, that's not tied to the budget. The Conservatives also came out this week with a press conference about what they want to see in the budget, specifically a youth jobs plan. Garnet Genuis was talking this up as ways that the government can do something positive. And again, this is more traditional, what you kind of see, I don't know, 6 months out from an election, which we could be. But in this case, Genuis was also asked, like, if they put all these in the budget, would you vote for the budget? And he's like, we'll have to see. We're just throwing some good ideas out here.
They're probably not going to vote for the budget, but so it made sense. They're leaving themselves a lot of room while also staking out a few areas where they can, say the government failed to deliver.
Yeah, their 4-point plan for youth unemployment is to cut red tape, number one, repealing anti-resource laws, cut taxes. That's all one. Number two, fix immigration, which I feel like the government has already pretty much started to do by dropping its targets way down to the point where we are like net negative population growth, which will have real economic problems in the future that we just don't talk about.
Some of the student visa, more questionable ones, which for a lot of the sketchy private colleges were basically work visa loophole more than anything else.
Yeah. The third point in this plan is to retarget the Canada Student Financial Assistance Program from a broad student aid program that helps all students to one that targets in-demand fields based on objective labor market data. So this would quite undercut the arts enrollment. It doesn't sound like they're actually suggesting increasing the program.
Or like reallocating within it.
Yeah. It's just, provide relatively more support to students pursuing in-demand fields. So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting one. I personally lean towards a universal post-secondary is valuable, even if like you don't get an immediate labor job out of it. Like an educated populace is generally good for economic productivity and many other things.
In general, there are definitely some degrees that don't have a particularly great ROI and often have a negative ROI when you take into account the cost. I can definitely see the argument for being a little more selective in it, in just that, there isn't like a lot of extra federal money that can be sloshed around, so really focusing it on the areas where there are real labor challenges. I mean, we were just talking about the medical side a few minutes ago, but plenty of other sectors need skilled workers, and wouldn't hurt to be kind of focused on a lot of that stuff rather than just a broad-based approach that kind of splashes money everywhere.
And finally, build homes where the jobs are, which sounds great. Their proposal is specifically a 100% capital write-off cost for companies that build workforce housing. So let's bring back company towns. Is that how I read that? Companies that build workforce housing. This will help small and larger employees alike attract workers. What small business is building housing and running a business?
Yeah, that's a good question. You hear this about like workforce housing all the time, and like not even all that confined to one particular part of the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. I've definitely heard like high-cost metro area school boards, for example, float the idea of workforce housing and stuff, and they're not exactly pat full of conservatives on those ones, but generally don't love the idea, because company towns weren't great, and it's not great that if you lose your job you immediately lose your housing.
What do you have against UBC? Although they don't.
Against which?
The University of British Columbia. And how it just owns all the land and does not have local government to set land use policy.
You can also just buy on the market stuff there. You don't have to be a UBC.
It's true. They do have some that is preferential to staff. But yeah, this is a weird one. Like, I'm not 100% against it, but although the write-off, I would have to see if it's
I would
more
imagine
efficient.
it's basically like a very accelerated depreciation schedule.
Yeah. I imagine it's just a tax waiver for a lot of companies, but I mean, they're ideas. So the conservatives are pitching things. The Bloc pitched very specific things. The NDP hasn't done anything.
Speaking of which, I'll skip through there a little more. And you want to know what the final point on that one is?
Oh, in the Bloc's plan? Go for it.
To amend, look at the Google Translate on this, so it might not entirely capture it, but it's to amend the provisions of the Lettry Tax Act that are detrimental to Quebec aerospace sector. Basically, they want to cut taxes on private jets.
I love it. I fucking love the Bloc. The Greens, I did look, have not proposed anything. They have not had a press release in a couple of weeks. They kind of just trickle them out every once in a while. So that's the opposition. For the government side, Mark Carney's starting to float some of the things that we're going to see. On the positive side, automatic tax filing is finally coming for the 5 million people at the bottom of the ladder with the most simple tax systems. But the net positive of that means people who should get income tested benefits will get them, because you usually have to file your taxes to get that. And if you weren't filing it, you were missing out on money. So we will give money to those who most need it through this provision. And it's something we've talked positively about for years. And
love this suggestion. I mean, they already have like pretty much all the information, because all the employers, a bunch of other aspects of the economy out there, like banks and stuff, they'll have to file stuff with the CRA. Like, now if you put money into an RSP, the CRA has a copy of how much got put into that and everything already, because the bank or brokerage you use has to file with the CRA for that stuff too. So it's real easy for them just to take all the information they already have, do a simple thing, and then just send it out. Or in theory will be easy. Like, who knows how much of a mess the probably written in COBOL tax system actually is to manage on the back end. But in theory, this is a pretty easy lift. But
the Tax Filer Empowerment Canada, the National Association for Tax Preparation and Software Firms, says this is subsidizing tax filing for people who already have free options. Oh, they suck so bad. I hate tax companies. Like, they're necessary, but for most people, they shouldn't be.
People.
Yeah. Other countries have figured this out. The whole program will be scaled up to a much more broad. It says the full scaling up will happen by 2028. So that's great. The other things continuing are the school food program is going to be made permanent. This will provide.
Didn't realize it wasn't.
Yeah, there are some things like that. Like, I just saw a provincial announcement that the UPass program has been extended for 5 years. And I was like, sorry, the UPass program where students at universities get transit passes paid for as part of their tuition, like they just get an extra fee for it. Yeah, that was negotiated every 3 to 5 years. And they've extended it for 5 years. But yeah, the school food program, Canada was one of the last G7, I think possibly the last OECD country without school meals. My kids don't have school meals at our local elementary. I think the province of BC would claim they do, because there is some we could fill out a form and get a bologna sandwich delivered to them from some dodgy kitchen that no one uses for obvious reasons. So this is good. There's a lot of studies showing when students eat, they do better.
Shocker.
Yeah. So.
And if you want to have a moment of culture shock, just explain to any American that you have to pack a lunch for your kids when you send them off to school, and they just don't get lunch provided.
Yeah. So this is good. Continue expanding it. Would love to actually see personally would love to see this in my school, but broadly it's a good program. My school is not that impoverished relative to some parts of the country, so it's not the priority other than my own, like, we don't want to have to make pack lunches because it sucks and kids yell about it. And I think that's going to be one of the things that was on the NDP's ask list, because the NDP pushed for that hard in the last parliament. The other thing,
if they were to have an ask list, but
they didn't have a public ask list, Scott.
I mean, from the reporting we talked about last week, it didn't sound like they had a private one either.
The other thing Carney announced in terms of the spending aisle is the Canada Strong Pass is extended to next summer because it was a big hit. This means you can go to museums, historic sites, national parks for free again next summer. And youth can get a discount on Via Rail tickets, which, like, is fine. I mean, there's some issue with, like, park over usage.
Yeah, and, like, the utility of being able to get from Toronto to Montreal in, like, 10 hours on a train that you're waiting for a freight train to pass for a while isn't, like, super high, but, better than nothing on this. But yeah,
it's gimmicky.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to spend money on Via Rail, you should, try to make a service that isn't terrible in its quality. But yeah, on the budget thing, I think the school lunch thing might be enough that, like, the NDP can, like, kind of sheepishly save face and be like, yeah, we got this thing, so, we're not going to bring the government down over this kind of thing, even though, like, everybody knew they were in no shape to go to an election, but having a face-saving way to get to that outcome was probably good for them.
Mm-hmm. The other thing Carney was hinting at today is our corporate taxes. They haven't been cut in a while, so we might ease the corporate tax burden, was the language in the budget, which kind of took me by surprise.
I mean, they've been talking a lot about economic competitiveness for a while, and yeah, taxes influence economic behavior, so not a huge surprise on that one.
I mean, there's been people say that, but then studies are inconclusive at times as to the effect of lowering corporate taxes on productivity, among other things.
It's definitely a factor on that, and it's been something that's been raised for a while, particularly in Canada's case, that we're not in a particularly tax competitive setup now, and it might have been fine when things were kind of coasting along. Like, hasn't been a great decade economically, but things were kind of coasting. But with some real economic uncertainty on the horizon, like, kind of finding anything that is going to potentially boost investments going to be probably beneficial, because, like, this is really one of those situations where we can't really afford to leave, like, any tool on the table for getting GDP growing, and the investment environment in Canada has been pretty lackluster for the past decade or so. That's a wild stat I saw in an ad column a little while ago, that the actual, like, capital stock of the country, by some measures, had decreased over the last several years, which is, like, genuinely wild for a country that isn't going through, like, a giant economic catastrophe, but was still but even just, like, the kind of trudging along with, like, somewhat anemic growth. When that was happening, that was portends for some real bad challenges. The one thing I am wondering on this, though, is, like, how's that going to count when it comes to the how the government's trying to count it? Because I could really see this, which really ought to be on the operations and revenue side, getting kind of quietly pushed to the capital side of the budget accounting process, because they're kind of doing like a wildly broad definition on that.
Yeah, so that's where I wanted to lean into. Like the obvious critique of a corporate tax cut is it's going to cost a lot of money. If you can't keep cutting revenue and expect to balance the operating budget, but as the government's capital budgeting framework has been announced, any government expense or tax expenditure that contributes to public or private sector capital formation held directly or on the government's balance sheet or on that of a private sector entity, indigenous community, or another level of government will be capital investments. And like, that's everything to some like level of definition. Like anything that affects public or private. Like the school meal program can arguably affect private sector capital formation because I don't have to buy lunch for my kid, and therefore my private sector capital is slightly higher, right? Like they're probably going to put school meal program on operating, but like
invest it or something. But
yeah, I keep it in my bank account in an investment. But like, it's nuts. Usually when I say capital investment, I mean government expenses that contribute to public capital formation and are held on the government's balance sheet, full stop.
Yeah, like I think of it, yeah, a capital expenditure that is going to generate an asset that is owned by the federal government, or, you know,
that you can later sell.
I could even argue that, like, given how we kind of do financing for major projects, that if it's held by another level, that's kind of fine. Like the federal government's throwing a lot of money at building out the 2 SkyTrain expansions going on right now. They're not going to be on the federal books when that's done, but like I think it's fair to consider that like a capital expenditure. So like I'm not going to be nitpicky on the other levels of government part, but yeah, if it's a capital expenditure because, you know, the stock market goes up on that, then that's
nuts.
Yeah, that's taking a very broad brush. And that was always the concern when this thing was first announced, because, you know, in theory, it kind of made sense to separate out the two, right? Like, there's present consumption, and then there's, you know, long-term investments that generate, you know, positive ROI assets, and, you know, you shouldn't really consider them in the same bucket, particularly when you're looking at like a single year's expenditures. But that's a little different but the problem is, you know, you set up a metric like that, and politicians will want to game it and play fast and loose with it in order to get the outcomes and perceptions they want, and that was always the concern. I mean, when this was first announced, I kind of thought it would be, yeah, year 4, they're going to, as they're leading into an election, probably categorize some stuff that really ought to be operations as capital in order to get the budget down a bit. Wasn't really expecting it in year 1, or even if they managed to be good on it, you know, the next government or the government after that probably wouldn't have been. But setting such a loose definition now really does not bode well for that.
Yeah, looking at their announcement, they do have like classifications where there's capital transfers to other levels of government, for like the SkyTrain you talked about. There's capital focused corporate income tax incentives. So just corporate tax cuts are therefore capital investments, which they're not. They're just not. That's just straight operating revenue. Amortization of federal capital, private sector research and development. That's like tax incentives or direct funding of R&D. I feel like if we don't have an equity stake, it's not government capital. That's just the end of the day. Growing the housing stock and unlocking large-scale private sector capital investment, so contracts to do that are all in there. They do note that other spending will be considered day-to-day operational. This includes major government expenditures like transfers to person, health and social transfers, and the cost of running government operations and services, including salaries and benefits. And so all that lefty spending is operational. All the economically, fiscally conservative spending is capital. And to balance the operating budget, I guess income tax and GST is still on that side. And then that's what they'll balance in 3 years. And then there's just going to be a massive capital deficit, as the PBO seems pretty excited about. They put out a statement on how the government's approach is looking and said, the fall budgeting cycle, that looks great, fine. Public accounts are a little bit behind. We're all upset about that. The government still doesn't seem to have any fiscal anchors.
Yeah, I mean, that went out the window years ago.
And is also abandoning federal debt to GDP ratio.
Just not good.
So our one anchor is the arbitrary operating budget will be balanced in 3 years.
Maybe.
And we'll possibly having a declining deficit to GDP ratio. So
yeah. So this is having a fiscal anchor is useful, because even if it's not the case that in any given year the optimum thing is necessarily going to be hitting that precise number or whatnot, or running a deficit below a certain amount or whatever, it's useful to actually just have some guardrails on the thing, because if you don't, it's real easy just to always err on one side, and slowly things get to an unsustainable point and kind of go off the rails on that. So just even if there's a reasonably strong case that particularly this budget, or well, we didn't have a budget in 2020, but budgets in that period and whatnot, yeah, there's an argument for higher deficits and that stuff. It's still real useful to have the guardrails as we need to course correct back to something that's on a more level track. So just getting rid of that's a real challenge on that.
So we'll look forward to continuing to preview the budget for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
On the trade side,
one other thought, circling back a little bit on the corporate tax thing. There aren't really any details in this, so it's going to be kind of interesting to see what's rolled out. One thing I've heard floated fairly commonly as a corporate tax thing that could be beneficial to spur investments, just introduce accelerated depreciation schedules for a lot of things, let the companies offset their taxes with the new investments quicker rather than stretching it out over several more years. So you could see stuff like that where even if you offset more up front, over the long run it's going to be probably not a huge change in the overall revenues on that, but one that still generates some more incentives on that stuff. So it'll be real curious to actually see what's in the budget on that before jump into a conclusion based off a broad category thing that gets floated.
On the trade front, a couple stories to go through quickly as we tie off the show. Canada and India, best friends again. Anita Anand is finishing off a trade talk with India. They have agreed to restore diplomats here, and we're sending ours back there. We're just kind of forgetting that they allegedly murdered one of our citizens on our soil, and it's all cool again. It's basically the story.
Yeah,
it's been trending that way under Carney, because
even under Trudeau, I think towards the end you saw a little bit of a sign that there was maybe some interest in not having quite as antagonistic a relationship with India.
And like some of it is arguably necessary,
Yeah.
given we can't pick fights with every large country in the world at the same time or be in fights. And we're already in fights with the USA and China. So,
Yeah, that's kind of
and
where I was
Russia.
going to go on this,
So
is that,
who's left?
yeah, ultimately, like the downside of being a smaller country that doesn't have the weight of a country like India, China, or the US is that you often have to make unfortunate trade-offs when advancing multiple interests simultaneously, because yeah, we have a very strong interest in not having other countries' governments do violence against our citizens, conduct covert actions on our soil, all that stuff. We also do have other interests we're trying to advance. The general prosperity of the country, strengthening ties in order to be able to basically use the relationship with one country to help offset challenges with others. And like, it's just kind of the downside of being a small country. Just not doing terribly economically on like a per capita basis, at least in absolute terms. For us being pretty terrible, but yeah, we're a rich country, but we're also a small country with only 40 million people, and that just doesn't give us a huge amount of weight in a lot of these things. And the downside to that is that you have to kind of pick and choose on some of this stuff. You can't always just take a bright line in the sand on one thing and expect not to have to deal with trade-offs elsewhere. And honestly, the only way out of that's a long-term thing where you just get the country to a much larger, more powerful position. But like, that's gonna be a long-term play, not a short-term thing. In the meantime, you do have to pick and choose on this one, and it's not a surprise they're picking and choosing on this one. And the other solution might be to just use or strengthen the RCMP and CSIS's abilities to actually break up these sorts of things in Canada. I can't actually think of hearing many. There was an arrest or two related to one of the gunmen, allegedly, I think a couple.
Well, they declared that gang a terrorist organization as
well.
well.
They declared the gang a terrorist organization, and there was, like 6 months ago, I think, an arrest or someone was arrested in Edmonton in relation to the killing in Surrey and stuff on that. But like, there isn't, the wide sweeping arrests and like rolling off the entire networks. That would also be one of the ways you can deal with it while advancing the other diplomatic interests on that. And Canada's not a country that's always considered national security and security in general a top priority that gets a lot of focus, but strengthening the institutional capacity to deal with those sorts of things is one of those ways you can kind of have your cake and eat it to at least a little bit more than we currently have the option to.
Build up it's funny how foreign interference has basically dropped off the discussion for a while, but we still need to deal with that. Part of those challenges are further exacerbated in our fight with the US this week. Stellantis, the automaker, has said they're going to stop work on their Brampton, Ontario production facility where they were going to make the Jeep Compass, and they're going to build it down in Belvedere, Illinois. That has made Melanie Joly, industry minister, very mad. She's threatened them legal action because Stellantis was one of those companies, if you'll remember, was offered $13 billion from the provincial and federal governments a couple of years ago to do stuff here. And not doing stuff here leaves a lot of egg on our face and makes a very bad situation for the auto sector in Ontario, especially if others follow suit.
Yeah. Not great. Kind of makes you question the benefit of those giant corporate handouts in the first place, but yeah, just in general not good on that. And yeah, we had a little more time we could delve into it, but
yeah, we have strongly worded letters for now. The other half
the
of the
most
story
Canadian
is
of responses, short of
yeah,
initiating a plan to study something in order
I mean,
not to have to make a decision on it.
Carney was also asked if we could hit the U.S. with retaliatory tariffs, and he said, no, now is the time to talk. The elbows are fully down, Scott. They
have been for a while now, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, kind of like a couple weeks after the election. Anyway, company wants to put a nuclear power plant on the moon. It's not like the worst idea because there is a lot of...
Well, didn't CSA sign a contract to a company in order to develop and explore this technology?
Yeah. Canadian Space Mining Corporation, very legitimate sounding name, is going to have a $1 million funding contract to develop low-enriched uranium nuclear reactors to be used on the moon. These would be micro reactors that are like the size of a truck, even smaller than small modular reactors. The idea is to power future lunar bases, which the Artemis mission is actually slowly getting us towards, and Canada is still a part of that. Russia and China are actually working together on their own. We're in a race to the moon again. Something is cool about this era. That's it. The moon is
honestly,
back.
Loki, love this. Not sure how much $1 million is going to advance things on this. That doesn't cover a lot of, nuclear engineer salaries for very long, but yeah, cool. We're developing this technology, and hey, if you can build a nuclear reactor on the moon, you can also build these like small micro reactors in, say, the high Arctic, which right now is very reliant on diesel generators for all the small dispersed communities. So great if we can develop it for that. Even better if we can then turn around and use the same technology here in our more remote areas.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this company's website. They have a former astronaut on staff as the EVP of strategy, Andrew Fustel, who's a Canadian-American former NASA astronaut. Yeah, good for them. Cool. Good luck. And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.